Number 1. Rico Asavdo. Just after 9:20 on the morning of Thursday, October 12, 2023, Elizabeth Cuevas noticed something highly suspicious at a home in the 4300 block of Helena Avenue on the south side of Youngstown, Ohio. The house belonged to her son, Ernesto Cuevas, who was locked up in a local jail at the time. Knowing the property should be completely empty, Elizabeth was shocked to see a strange, bald man walking around inside. She immediately dialed 911 to report a burglary in progress. Within minutes, Detective Sergeant Michael Lambert of the Youngstown Police Department arrived at the scene. But instead of finding a panicked intruder trying to make a run for it, he was met in the driveway by 45-year-old Rico Asavdo, a former local heavyweight boxer and professional MMA fighter. Asavdo was standing there calmly, holding a broom and a trash bag, acting like he belonged there. He told the officer a highly convincing story, that he was a contractor hired by Ernesto Cuevas to do drywall and plumbing repairs on the vacant house. To verify his story, Sergeant Lambert walked through the house with Asavdo, who acted every bit like a cooperative worker. But his story didn't hold up for long. When Elizabeth Cuevas arrived at the house, she took one look at Asavdo and told the officer she had no idea who he was. Still trying to keep the act going, Asavdo claimed he had keys to the house, but when the officer asked him to unlock the front door, not a single key on his ring fit the lock. Then Sergeant Lambert asked for his ID. Asavdo claimed he didn't have it with him, and instead gave the officer a fake name, Rick Berkeymer, with a birth date of December 23, 1982. Sergeant Lambert walked back to his patrol car to run the name through his database, but it came back with absolutely no record. Sensing something was seriously off, the officer walked back up to the porch and ordered Asavdo to turn around and put his hands on the wall. That was the exact moment the cooperative facade completely shattered. Asavdo broke away, bolted inside the house, and sprinted up the stairs, screaming, "I have a gun on me." What Sergeant Lambert didn't know yet was that he was a violent offender who had previously served 6 years in state prison for a brutal 2016 domestic violence assault that left his ex-girlfriend requiring facial reconstruction surgery. He was currently out on parole, but was actively evading arrest for outstanding warrants, including a parole violation. Asavdo knew that the second handcuffs clicked on his wrists. He was going straight back to a state penitentiary, and he was absolutely terrified of going back to a cell. Cornered in a narrow upstairs hallway, Asavdo decided he was never going back. Over the next 2 tense minutes, he made his intentions clear, telling the officer that his mom had just died, that he had nothing left to live for, and explicitly stating, "You're going to have to shoot me because I'm not going to jail." Then came the fatal moment. Asavdo suddenly lunged forward, aggressively reaching into his waistband as if he were trying to pull something out. Believing Asavdo was reaching for a weapon, Sergeant Lambert fired 3 shots, striking him. Asavdo collapsed and was pronounced dead at the scene. But the final, tragic twist came during the post-shooting investigation. When forensic teams processed the scene, they discovered that Asavdo didn't actually have a weapon on him at all. The metallic object he had aggressively pulled from his waistband was actually a chrome hand tool, specifically a buffing wheel cleaning tool. In those final moments, Asavdo used it to make Sergeant Lambert believe he was reaching for a weapon, apparently choosing to die at the hands of police, rather than go back to prison. Number 2. Matthew Huddle. 42-year-old Matthew Huddle knew exactly what the inside of a prison cell felt like, and he had promised himself he would die before he ever went back. He had already survived 2 separate lockups, a grueling 2.5-year state sentence for a domestic incident involving the physical abuse of his 3-year-old son, and a recent 6-month federal stretch for storming the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. On January 26, 2025, Huddle was driving down State Road 14 in Jasper County, Indiana, feeling like a free man after receiving a presidential pardon just 6 days earlier. But Huddle was playing a dangerous game. He was driving on a permanently suspended license, which made him a habitual traffic violator, a state-level felony. When a local deputy pulled him over for speeding and told him he was going to jail, Huddle's worst nightmare became an immediate reality. In less than 4 minutes, this routine Sunday afternoon traffic stop was about to morph into a frantic, high-stakes nightmare, setting off a sequence of events that would stun the local community and push a newly freed man to make a terrifying, irreversible choice. Huddle believed the hardest part of his life was finally behind him. He thought his slate had been wiped completely clean. But what he didn't realize was that while the federal government was willing to forgive his past, the state of Indiana wasn't ready to let it go. The reason a simple speeding stop turned into a life-or-death struggle actually began years earlier, when Huddle first got caught up in the system. Huddle was just a guy with too much free time on his hands after getting out of jail for previous driving offenses. So, when his uncle, Dale Huddle, suggested they make the trip from Northwest Indiana to Washington, D.C. in early January of 2021, Matthew went along simply because he thought he was going to witness a historic moment. But that historic moment turned into the infamous storming of the U.S. Capitol. When the massive crowd breached the police barricades and forced their way inside the building to stop the certification of the presidential election, Huddle went right in with them. He spent about 15 minutes wandering around inside the restricted Capitol building, and like many others that day, he recorded the entire intrusion on his own cell phone. He didn't realize it at the time, but he was handing the FBI exactly what they needed. Because the Capitol had been locked down by law enforcement, stepping foot inside was a federal crime. That cell phone footage eventually became the primary piece of evidence the government used to charge him. By November of 2023, Huddle had pleaded guilty to federal misdemeanor charges of entering a restricted building and was sentenced to 6 months in a federal penitentiary, followed by 1 year of supervised release. But then came January 20th, 2025. On his very first day back in the Oval Office, President Donald Trump signed Proclamation 10,887, granting a blanket pardon to nonviolent January 6th defendants. For Matthew Huddle, the federal slate was wiped entirely clean. He was fully pardoned, and his future was his own again. But federal clemency did not wipe away Huddle's state-level criminal record, and it certainly didn't erase his fear of ending up back behind bars. Beyond the high-profile federal case, Huddle already had a long history of trouble with the law. Years earlier, he served 2.5 years in state prison for a disturbing child abuse case involving his own 3-year-old son. And after repeatedly getting into trouble on the road, Indiana eventually classified him as a habitual traffic violator. Under Indiana law, driving while classified as a habitual traffic violator wasn't just another traffic offense. It was a level 6 felony. And for Huddle, who was still on supervised release, a new felony arrest could put him right back behind bars. On Sunday, January 26th, at around 4:21 in the afternoon, Huddle was driving along State Road 14 near the Pulaski County border when he was clocked doing 70 miles per hour in a 55-mile-per-hour zone. A Jasper County Sheriff's deputy spotted Huddle speeding along State Road 14 and turned on his emergency lights. Huddle pulled over, and at first, it looked like nothing more than a routine traffic stop. But when the deputy ran Huddle's information, he discovered that Huddle was classified as a habitual traffic violator. At that point, this was no longer a simple speeding stop. Huddle was now facing arrest for a level 6 felony. The deputy walked back up to the car and ordered Huddle to step out. Huddle complied, but the exact second the deputy told him he was under arrest, Huddle's cooperative facade completely shattered. The absolute dread of returning to a prison cell took over. Before the deputy could secure the handcuffs, Huddle broke away and ran back toward his open car door. The deputy lunged after him, diving into the driver's cabin as Huddle scrambled desperately to reach for something hidden near the console. The two became locked in a frantic struggle inside the driver's side of the vehicle. The deputy grabbed at Huddle, repeatedly yelling at him to stop. In that split second, Huddle pulled a loaded 9mm handgun from the vehicle and raised it toward the officer. Fearing for his life, the deputy drew his service weapon and fired multiple rounds at point-blank range, striking Huddle. The deputy fell back out of the car and ran to his patrol unit to call for medical assistance and backup. First responders rushed to the scene on State Road 14, but the injuries were severe. Matthew Huddle was pronounced dead right there on the shoulder of the highway, just 6 days after receiving a presidential pardon. When forensic investigators from the Indiana State Police processed the scene, they recovered the loaded 9mm handgun and additional ammunition from the floorboards where Huddle had fought the deputy. The shooting was later independently reviewed by the Clinton County Prosecutor's Office. On February 26, 2025, Deputy Prosecutor Chris Vaughter ruled that the deputy's use of deadly force was legally justified under Indiana law. Number 3. Shantes Lurie. On April 29, 2026, 39-year-old Shantes Lurie was walking down a dark street in Columbus, Ohio, just after 7:30 in the evening. He abandoned his vehicle after fleeing from a traffic stop and was now trying to get away on foot when 4 police cruisers suddenly surrounded him. An officer ordered him to get on the ground, but Lurie apparently believed he could still fight his way out. He couldn't have been more wrong. The confrontation took place near the intersection of Hamilton and East 15th Avenues in the North Linden neighborhood. Lurie was a high-risk parole violator who had been on the run for 3 weeks. But as the officers stepped out of their cruisers, they had no idea they were approaching an armed man who was determined never to go back to prison. But the reason this encounter turned deadly within seconds goes back years, through a long criminal history that kept bringing Lurie back into contact with the law enforcement. Shantes Lurie was no stranger to prison. Over the course of 2 decades, he built up a long and often violent criminal record in Ohio, with offenses ranging from drug trafficking and illegal weapons possession to complicity in attempted murder. He knew the criminal justice system well, and more importantly, he knew exactly what going back to prison would mean. In August of 2025, Lurie completed his latest prison stretch for a felony aggravated assault conviction. He was released under strict state supervision, ordered to serve 3 years of parole. Under this agreement, Lurie was required to maintain a stable address, check in regularly with his parole officer, and strictly avoid firearms. But Lurie quickly cut the ties. He stopped reporting, left his registered address, and disappeared into the Columbus area. By April 7, 2026, the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction officially classified Lurie as a high-risk violator at large. An active warrant was issued for his arrest. Lurie knew that his parole violation, combined with carrying an illegal firearm, could result in a lengthy prison sentence. He was a cornered man, and mentally, he had already crossed a point of no return. He would not go back alive. On the evening of April 29th, that mental calculation was put to the test. At exactly 7:18 p.m., Columbus Division of Police officers spotted a white Chevrolet Suburban driving erratically near the intersection of Hamilton and Minnesota Avenues. When officers activated their emergency lights to initiate a traffic stop, Lurie didn't pull over. Instead, he slammed on the accelerator, weaving dangerously through residential streets to escape. Following safety protocols, the officers called off the pursuit to avoid the risk of a high-speed crash in a residential area. Lurie managed to get away, but he knew police were now looking for his vehicle. He drove another 1.5 miles, abandoned the Suburban in a secluded area, and continued on foot. He apparently believed that by walking through the neighborhood, he could slip past the officers searching for him. He was wrong. By then, officers searching the area already had his description. At 7:32 in the evening, just 14 minutes after the initial pursuit, officers spotted a man matching Lurie's description walking near Hamilton and East 15th Avenues. 4 patrol cruisers converged on him, blocking his path. An officer opened his cruiser door, stepped out, and told Lurie to get on the ground. Lurie didn't run or freeze. Instead, he reached into his clothing, pulled out a concealed handgun, and opened fire at close range. One of the bullets struck the officer in the upper thigh, severing his femoral artery, a potentially fatal injury that can cause someone to bleed to death within minutes. The surrounding officers immediately returned fire, striking Lurie multiple times. He collapsed onto the sidewalk. But with their fellow officer bleeding heavily from a severed femoral artery, there was no time to wait for an ambulance. The officers quickly loaded him into a patrol cruiser and rushed him straight to Grant Medical Center. He was taken into emergency surgery and survived the potentially fatal injury. Shantes Lurie was also taken to the hospital, but his injuries were fatal. He was pronounced dead just after 8 o'clock that evening. An independent investigation by the Clinton County Prosecutor's Office concluded on February 26, 2025, officially ruling the officer's actions as legally justified self-defense. Number 4. Cory Tanner. At around 10 o'clock On the morning of Wednesday, August 13th, 24-year-old Cory Tanner was hiding inside a home in the rural community of Espanola, Florida. Outside, dozens of heavily armed U.S. Marshals and Flagler County deputies had the property completely surrounded. Hoping to convince Tanner to come out peacefully, a deputy handed the cruiser's PA microphone to his brother, who pleaded with him to surrender. But Tanner had no intention of walking out with his hands up. He was wanted on active warrants for attempted first-degree murder, aggravated battery with a firearm, and aggravated assault. He had already spent time behind bars, and if convicted of attempted murder, he could be facing life in prison. Tanner had reportedly told family members and people close to him that he would never go back. He even warned that if police ever came for him again, he would go out shooting. And that morning, it became clear just how far he was willing to go to make sure that didn't happen. Tanner was already well known to local law enforcement and was identified by authorities as an alleged member of the Crips. He also had a long history of arrests. Many of the charges against him, including battery on an inmate, domestic battery, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, were later dropped or dismissed. Still, his repeated encounters with police gave him a reputation as someone officers considered high risk. The breaking point came on the night of July 23, 2014. In South Bonnell, a heated argument turned violent. Investigators alleged that Tanner pulled out a gun and fired into a group of people, striking and injuring one man. Tanner fled the scene and disappeared into the rural areas of Flagler County. The shooting set off a massive manhunt, and Bonnell police obtained warrants for his arrest on serious felony charges. As a repeat offender, Tanner was now facing the very real possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars. For nearly 3 weeks, Tanner evaded capture. He sought refuge in Espanola, a rural, heavily wooded hamlet, hiding out in a small home at 64 Espanola Road. The home belonged to his brother, John Johnson, who lived there with his girlfriend and her 4 young children. On the morning of Wednesday, August 13th, the law finally caught up. Acting on intelligence that Tanner was hiding in the house, a massive task force assembled. The Flagler County Sheriff's Office and Bonnell Police, realizing the high danger level of a suspect who had vowed to go out in a shootout, requested the heavy tactical support of the U.S. Marshals Regional Fugitive Task Force. At around 9:45 in the morning, law enforcement intercepted John Johnson in a traffic stop away from the residence. Johnson confirmed what they feared. Tanner was inside, and he wasn't alone. 4 young children were also in the house, still asleep. As dozens of tactical officers surrounded the house, Tanner realized police had found him. He grabbed his phone and sent a series of messages to his girlfriend, Maddie Verdell, telling her he was sorry. At 10 o'clock, the tactical units made their move, knocking heavily on the doors and identifying themselves as police. Tanner refused to answer. Knowing children were inside, officers focused on evacuation. They began calling out to the house, ordering whoever was inside to step out. Slowly, the front door opened, and the 4 children were guided safely across the yard and into the arms of waiting deputies. With the children safely out of the house, deputies focused on getting Tanner to surrender. For more than 15 minutes, they called out to him over a cruiser's PA system, repeatedly telling him to come outside with his hands up. At one point, they even handed the microphone to his brother John, hoping Tanner might listen to someone he knew. Inside, Tanner remained completely silent. He knew the yard was crawling with federal agents and canine units. There was nowhere left to run, and the promise he had made that he would never go back to prison was now being put to the test. Rather than send officers inside and risk walking into an ambush, the tactical team sent a surveillance robot into the house first. As it moved through the doorway, the sound of its wheels broke the silence inside. The sound of the robot seemed to startle Tanner, who apparently thought officers were coming into the house. He began shouting and then ran toward the back door instead of surrendering. He burst through the rear door and charged into the backyard directly toward the U.S. Marshals holding the perimeter. As he came toward them, his right arm was stretched out in front of him, holding what appeared to be a dark, metallic object. From where the Marshals were standing, they believed Tanner was charging at them with a weapon. Believing Tanner was about to shoot at them, 3 officers opened fire. 2 fired their handguns, while a third fired an M4 rifle. Tanner was hit 5 times, including once in the head, and collapsed near the back door. The shooting was over within seconds. But when investigators approached Tanner's body, they discovered he wasn't armed. The dark object officers saw in his outstretched hand wasn't a gun. It was a black glass bottle of Cadillac brand cologne. Ultimately, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement cleared the officers of any criminal wrongdoing, ruling that the force used was justified given the perceived threat and Tanner's aggressive actions. Number 5. Charlie Nie. Just after 1:30 in the morning on Thursday, March 14th, 2024, a frantic call came into emergency dispatchers in Covington, Kentucky. The caller reported a man violently hacking at an apartment door with a heavy kitchen butcher knife. To the dispatcher, it sounded like a brutal home invasion in progress. But inside that apartment complex, a different kind of tragedy was unfolding. The man with the knife was 34-year-old Charlie Nie, who suffered from severe schizophrenia and spent much of that day battling terrifying auditory hallucinations. The officers heading to the apartment, however, didn't have the full picture. What they knew was that an armed man was trying to force his way into someone's home. Nie was also on parole and had a long criminal history. So by the time officers arrived, they were walking into a situation that was already dangerously out of control. Nie was a local handyman and mechanical maintenance worker from Owenton, Kentucky, who was also well known in the area as a talented tattoo artist. He wasn't there to rob anyone. He was in the midst of a severe schizophrenic episode. But to the responding officers, Nie looked every bit like an active, deadly threat. Standing in the shadows of the courtyard, they drew their service weapons, turned on their flashlights, and ordered Nie to drop the butcher knife. Nie's longtime girlfriend, Makisha Asher, was standing nearby, watching the nightmare unfold in real time. Desperate to save him, she frantically screamed to the officers that Nie was severely mentally ill and having a breakdown. Seeking to de-escalate, the officers repeatedly begged him to put down the blade, but Nie refused to comply. The standoff quickly started to escalate. Instead of backing away or raising his hands, Nie stared directly at the officers, intentionally squared his shoulders, and placed both of his hands firmly behind his back, hiding the knife from view. When the officers shouted at him to show his hands, Nie defied their commands and began pacing directly toward them. What the officers didn't know yet was that he was an active offender who had recently been released on parole after being convicted of wanton endangerment and criminal mischief in 2023. He knew that the second the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, his parole was over, and a cold prison cell was waiting for him. Confronted with that reality, Nie decided he wasn't going back. In a split-second decision, Nie aggressively charged directly down the officers' line of fire. Believing their lives were in immediate danger, Officers Morris and Sinacori fired multiple shots, striking Nie and sending him to the ground. He was rushed to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead. The shooting quickly became controversial. Makisha Asher questioned the officer's actions, claiming Nie was already on the ground when the final shots were fired. She also argued that police could have used a taser instead of shooting him. But a review of the officer's body camera footage reached a different conclusion. Kenton County Commonwealth's attorney Rob Sanders and Kentucky State Police determined that Nie was charging at the officers with a knife, leaving them with little time to react. They also concluded that using a taser in that situation would not have been a safe option. In the end, the officers were cleared of any wrongdoing. But the final note of the case came from the prosecutor himself. When formally closing the investigation, Commonwealth's attorney Rob Sanders publicly emphasized Nie's violent criminal history and active parole status, bluntly stating that the 34-year-old should still have been in prison rather than out on the streets. Number 6. James Glenn. Just before 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening, 56-year-old James Glenn was driving his dark SUV toward a busy intersection in North Phoenix. Earlier that morning, he cut off his GPS ankle monitor and skipped court before the verdict in his case was announced. He may have thought he had managed to get away, but police were already closing in. Within seconds, a tactical K-9 unit moved in and deployed a heavy nylon net around one of his rear tires, locking the axle and bringing the SUV to a stop. The takedown happened at the intersection of North 23rd Avenue and West Pinnacle Peak Road. Glenn, who had just been convicted of sex crimes against a child and was now wanted on a no-bond warrant, was trapped inside his SUV. A second patrol vehicle blocked the driver's side door, leaving him with nowhere to go. After spending the last 9 hours trying to avoid arrest, Glenn was now facing the very thing he had been running from, and he was about to make one final attempt to avoid going to prison. Glenn was cornered at that intersection because of what happened in court earlier that day. For months, he was prosecuted in Maricopa County Superior Court on 15 felony counts, including sexual conduct with a minor. In Arizona, convictions for dangerous crimes against children can carry lengthy prison sentences that must be served one after another. At 56 years old, Glenn knew what that could mean. A guilty verdict on even some of those charges could keep him in prison for the rest of his life. Throughout the trial, Glenn remained free on bond, but he was required to wear a GPS ankle monitor. Once the jury began deliberating, he knew that freedom could end at any moment. If the jury found him guilty, his bond would be revoked and he would be taken into custody. For Glenn, that meant facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison, and he had no intention of sticking around for the verdict. On the morning of Thursday, June 11th, 2026, Glenn made his move. Sometime after sunrise, he cut through the band of his GPS ankle monitor and left the active tracker on a counter inside his home. By leaving it there, he may have hoped the signal would make it appear that he was still at home and buy him some time before pretrial services realized he was gone. But by 9 o'clock that morning, it was clear Glenn was gone. When court began and he failed to show up, officials checked his GPS monitor and found that it had not moved from his home. The judge immediately issued a no-bond warrant for his arrest, but Glenn's absence did not stop the trial. The case continued without him, and the jury found him guilty on all 15 counts. Glenn was now a convicted fugitive, facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison, and the Phoenix Police Department's Tactical Support Bureau was brought in to find him. For the next several hours, Glenn remained on the run while detectives worked to track him down. Then, just before 6 o'clock that evening, undercover officers spotted his dark SUV near 23rd Avenue. Because Glenn was considered dangerous and possibly armed, officers decided not to risk a high-speed chase. As his SUV slowed near the intersection, a canine cruiser pulled up behind him and deployed a grappler device locking the wheel and bringing the SUV to a stop. At the same time, a second tactical vehicle pulled up against Glenn's driver's side door, blocking it and preventing him from getting out. Heavily armed officers surrounded the SUV, screaming at Glenn to raise his hands and surrender. But through the glass of the driver's side window, officers saw Glenn reach down and pull a semi-automatic handgun, pointing it directly at their line of fire. Believing Glenn was about to shoot, 2 tactical officers opened fire. Several rounds struck the windshield and doors of the SUV. Once the shooting stopped, officers secured Glenn's weapon and paramedics were called in. But Glenn could not be saved. He was pronounced dead in the driver's seat. Ultimately, the subsequent investigation and critical incident briefing released by the Phoenix Police Department cleared the officers of any wrongdoing, confirming that they had acted in self-defense against a lethal threat. Number 7. Joseph Pacini. On December 30th, 2014, 52-year-old Joseph Pacini uploaded a final chilling video to YouTube, dared the police to kill him, and drove his Nissan sedan toward a local gym. He believed he was taking a heroic stand against a massive government conspiracy. He couldn't have been more wrong. Within 30 minutes of hitting upload, Pacini was completely surrounded by tactical officers at a busy Delaware County intersection, forcing a split-second confrontation that would bring his online crusade to a sudden, violent halt. It all came to an end at the intersection of Garrett Road and Shadeland Avenue in Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania. Pacini was suffering from severe persecutory delusions and spent the previous 24 hours posting a series of frantic videos in which he declared war on the police. He also made it clear that he would never go back to prison, and when officers finally caught up with him, Pacini was prepared to use his car as a weapon rather than surrender. Pacini's behavior was tied to serious mental health problems that had affected him for years. He lived in an apartment in Clifton Heights, and at one point, his condition became so severe that his mother had him involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility in an effort to get him help. Over time, Pacini became increasingly paranoid. He believed federal agencies, including the FBI and CIA, were watching him, tracking his movements and plotting against him. Things took a serious turn on Monday, December 29th, 2014, after an incident at the LA Fitness on Westchester Pike in Havertown. An employee called police to report that a member was acting irrationally and erratically inside the gym. That member was Pacini. Haverford Township Detective Matt Huddle later left Pacini a voicemail asking him about what happened, but Pacini did not see it as a routine call from police. To him, it confirmed what he already believed, that law enforcement was watching him and coming after him. That night, Pacini turned on his webcam and began uploading a series of rambling videos to YouTube. Across 3 videos, his statements became increasingly desperate and threatening. He addressed the police, the FBI, and the CIA directly, making it clear that he had no intention of surrendering. Pacini also spoke about his previous encounters with the law, including a 2005 felony case in which he was accused of holding his landlord inside an office at knife point. Those charges were later withdrawn, but Pacini remained deeply afraid of being arrested and sent to prison. At one point, he told his online audience, "There's no way in hell I'm going back to prison. Just kill me. That's the easiest option. Have your people kill me." His videos also revealed the extent of his delusions. Pacini claimed that he was the male version and twin flame soulmate of singer-songwriter Sarah Bareilles. He even pleaded with her to come forward and save him from the authorities, giving her just 12 to 24 hours to do so. By Tuesday afternoon, December 30th, Pacini uploaded his final video. In it, he taunted police and announced that he was heading back to the same LA Fitness, daring them to stop him. After seeing the videos, Haverford Township Police obtained a warrant for his arrest on charges of terroristic threats, stalking, and harassment. Officers from neighboring departments were also called in to help find him before he reached the gym. At around 4:30 that afternoon, officers from Haverford Township, Upper Darby, and Clifton Heights spotted Pacini's silver Nissan and boxed him in at the busy intersection of Garrett Road and Shadeland Avenue. Armed officers approached the Nissan on foot, repeatedly ordering Pacini to turn off the engine and get out of the car, but Pacini refused. Instead, he threw the car into reverse and accelerated into an Upper Darby police cruiser, nearly hitting Clifton Heights Police Chief Tim Rockenbach, who was standing nearby. Pacini then shifted into drive and began moving toward the officers in front of him. 5 officers opened fire. Around 20 rounds were fired into the Nissan. Pacini was hit multiple times and collapsed behind the wheel. He was pronounced dead at the scene. When investigators searched the car, they found that Pacini was physically unarmed. He had chosen to use his vehicle as his final lethal weapon. Police Superintendent Michael Chitwood later said Pacini appeared determined to die that day, leaving the officers to respond when he drove his car toward them. Number 8. Lavell Mixon. 26-year-old Lavell Sean Mixon sat inside his silver Buick in East Oakland while a motorcycle officer checked his identification. It was shortly after 1 o'clock on the afternoon of Saturday, March 21st, 2009. He had been stopped for a minor lane change violation, and at first, it appeared to be a routine traffic stop. But Mixon had a concealed semi-automatic pistol inside the car, and he had no intention of letting the officer take him into custody. What happened next would turn that routine traffic stop into one of the deadliest days in the history of the Oakland Police Department. The stop happened near 74th Avenue. Mixon was on parole and had a long criminal history, so he knew that being arrested again could send him straight back to prison. But Mixon had already made up his mind. Whatever happened next, he was not going back. And the 2 officers standing beside his Buick had no idea just how far he was prepared to go to make sure of it. By that point, Mixon had spent much of his life in and out of the justice system. He grew up in East Oakland, an area that had struggled for years with poverty, gang violence, and a deeply strained relationship with the Oakland Police Department. His own trouble with the law began early. By 13, he was already being arrested for battery, and at 20, he was sent to Corcoran State Prison, where he served time for assault with a deadly weapon and armed robbery. Mixon hated prison and, after his release in October 2007, he was determined not to go back. But his freedom did not last long. By February 2009, he stopped reporting to his parole officer, and a no-bail warrant was issued for his arrest. The people close to Mixon knew how strongly he felt about going back to prison. But Mixon had another reason to fear the police. Just one day earlier, on Friday, March 20th, a California Department of Justice crime lab matched his DNA to the unsolved sexual assault of a 12-year-old girl the month before. A parole violation might have meant another short stretch behind bars, but the new case could put him in prison for the rest of his life. The two motorcycle officers who stopped Mixon had no idea about the DNA match. But Mixon didn't know that. When he saw the police lights behind him, he may have believed they were coming for him because of the assault. When Sergeant Mark Dunican and Officer John Hagee checked the license Mixon gave them, they discovered it was fake. As they approached the Buick to arrest him, Mixon pulled out a 9mm semi-automatic pistol and opened fire. Both officers fell to the ground. But Mixon did not simply drive away. He got out of the Buick, walked over to the wounded officers, and shot them again at close range. He then left his car behind and ran into the surrounding neighborhood. By 2:30 that afternoon, a massive police perimeter had locked down the neighborhood. Acting on an anonymous tip, tactical units surrounded a multi-family apartment building on 74th Avenue. Mixon had barricaded himself inside a ground-floor apartment belonging to his sister, pulling a heavy, military-grade SKS semi-automatic rifle from a closet. Police tried to get Mixon to surrender, but received no response. At around 3:15, an Oakland police SWAT team moved in through the front door. Believing Mixon was somewhere inside the apartment, officers deployed flashbang grenades as they entered, filling the narrow hallway with smoke and dust. Mixon was hiding inside a closet near the back of the apartment. As the SWAT team moved through the home, he raised his SKS rifle and fired through the walls toward the sound of the approaching officers. The rounds tore through the walls and struck the officers on the other side. SWAT Sergeant Irvin Romans was killed, while Sergeant Daniel Sakai was critically wounded and later died. A third officer, Sergeant Pat Gonzalez, was also shot and injured. The remaining SWAT officers returned fire, killing Mixon inside the closet. In the aftermath, an independent board of inquiry criticized several aspects of the SWAT operation, including how quickly the entry team was assembled and sent into the apartment. But by the end of that afternoon, Lavell Mixon had killed 4 Oakland police officers and wounded another. He had been determined not to go back to prison, and his attempt to avoid arrest ended in one of the deadliest days in the history of the Oakland Police Department. Number 9. Diamond Mazer Robinson. At around midnight on Wednesday, March 11, 2026, SWAT vehicles surrounded a multi-level parking garage at Children's Medical Center in Dallas. Inside a parked car, 39-year-old Diamond Mazer Robinson sat quietly with a stolen handgun. For years, Robinson had lived under a false identity, even working as a close protection security officer for a sitting member of Congress. But that double life had finally caught up with him. Within hours, the hospital parking garage would become the scene of a deadly confrontation with police. For nearly a decade, Robinson lived under a carefully constructed false identity. To family, friends, clients, and even the police officers who worked security jobs for him, he was known as Mike King, the owner of a private security company called Off-Duty Police Services. To make the operation look legitimate, he used stolen federal government license plates and created realistic-looking gold badges and identification cards for a fictitious agency he called the Specialty Dignitary Police. The deception worked for years, with real Dallas police officers unknowingly accepting off-duty jobs through his company, unaware that the man running it was a wanted fugitive. It all came crashing down when an officer recognized one of Robinson's vehicles as matching a bulletin for stolen government plates, setting off the manhunt that eventually cornered him. The business appeared to be thriving. Off-duty police services provided armed security for banks, luxury hotels, and political events across the Dallas area. Robinson's reputation became so established that he was even hired to coordinate close protection security for U.S. Representative Jasmine Crockett during campaign events. To everyone around him, Mike King looked like a respected security professional. No one realized he was actually a wanted fugitive living under a false identity. Since 2017, he had been wanted on 2 felony theft warrants and a parole violation. His criminal record included convictions for theft and tampering with government records. He knew that a routine fingerprint scan or background check would expose his true identity, and end the life he had spent years building. Everything began to fall apart in late February 2026. The Irving Police Department issued a bulletin about a black SUV displaying stolen federal government license plates. One of the Dallas police officers, who had previously worked security jobs through Robinson's company, recognized the vehicle and alerted investigators. That tip led detectives to Robinson's true identity. Before long, they confirmed that the man known as Mike King was actually Diamond Mazaire Robinson, a wanted fugitive. The final chase began at 11 o'clock on the night of Wednesday, March 11th, when Dallas patrol units spotted Robinson and attempted a traffic stop. Terrified of a lifetime behind bars, Robinson slammed on the gas, initiating a brief, high-speed pursuit before disappearing into the midnight traffic. Knowing his face and vehicle were now flagged citywide, a desperate Robinson pulled into the multi-level parking garage of the Children's Medical Center, attempting to blend into the hospital traffic. But police quickly tracked his coordinates, flooding the garage with tactical cruisers and boxing his vehicle in against the concrete pillars. A tense, agonizing standoff ensued. For hours, crisis negotiators tried desperately to establish contact, pleading with Robinson through megaphones, and even offering to patch in his family members if he would simply turn off his engine and surrender. But Robinson's fear of returning to prison was absolute. He sat in the darkness of his barricaded vehicle, ignoring their pleas as the clock ticked toward dawn. Finally, at approximately 4:30 on the morning of Thursday, March 12th, SWAT commanders authorized the use of non-lethal force. Officers deployed burning canisters of tear gas directly into the vehicle to flush him out. As the smoke filled the car, Robinson pushed open the passenger door and stumbled outside, coughing and visibly disoriented. But instead of surrendering, he reached into his waistband, pulled out a stolen handgun, and aimed it at the officers. 3 Dallas SWAT officers immediately opened fire. Multiple rounds struck Robinson, and he collapsed onto the parking garage floor. Paramedics responded, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. After the shooting, investigators searched Robinson's vehicle and recovered a large collection of stolen police equipment, body armor, and several firearms. U.S. Representative Jasmine Crockett later said she was shocked by what had happened, describing the news as difficult to reconcile with the security guard she believed she knew. Number 10. Johnny Sims. By early 2011, 22-year-old Johnny Sims had already been arrested 11 times as a juvenile and had multiple adult felony convictions for armed robbery. Even so, he repeatedly received relatively short sentences and probation, allowing him to return to the streets again and again. That cycle came to an end on a sunny morning in Miami-Dade County, when Sims made a decision that left 2 people dead. On Thursday, January 20th, 2011, that streak finally came to an end. A fugitive warrants team tracked Sims to his mother's home in Liberty City, where detectives Roger Castillo and Amanda Howarth arrived with a warrant for his arrest on a first-degree murder charge. Sims knew the arrest would likely send him to prison for the rest of his life. Rather than surrender, he decided he wasn't going back without a fight. Sims carried a constant reminder of the life he was living. Tattooed across his hands were the word "savage" and the numbers 10-20 life, a reference to Florida's mandatory minimum gun sentencing law. He understood exactly what those numbers meant. If he was caught with a gun while on probation, or convicted in the latest case against him, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. After years of moving between juvenile detention centers and adult prisons, Sims had no intention of going back. The case that finally caught up with Sims began 3 months earlier, on October 16, 2010. During a party at an apartment complex, Sims's sister claimed that 27-year-old Cornelius Larry had disrespected her. Not long afterward, investigators said Sims armed himself with a handgun, rode to the apartment complex on a bicycle, confronted Larry in a stairwell, and shot him twice before fleeing. The killing set off a lengthy investigation. Many people were afraid to come forward because they feared retaliation from the Sims family. Even so, detectives gradually gathered enough evidence to obtain a warrant charging Sims with first-degree murder. On the morning of January 20th, a 4-person warrants team was dispatched to a duplex on Northwest 54th Street, where Sims was believed to be hiding. They were highly experienced plainclothes officers, wearing tactical vests. When the detectives knocked and identified themselves, Sims's mother, Lorraine, came to the door and began opening the metal security gate. It was the only distraction the young fugitive needed. Without warning, Sims rushed out of a rear bedroom, using his mother as cover before pushing past her onto the narrow exterior walkway. As he came through the doorway, he was already firing a loaded handgun. The attack happened in seconds. Detective Roger Castillo was shot in the upper body and died at the scene. Detective Amanda Howarth was shot in the head before she could draw her service weapon. As gunfire rang through the apartment complex, Detective Deidre Beecher dove for cover and seriously injured her knee. Detective Oscar Placencia, who had been covering the rear of the duplex, rushed toward the front after hearing the shots. Placencia spotted Sims attempting to flee down the walkway. Standing his ground, Placencia fired a rapid sequence of rounds, striking the 22-year-old multiple times. Sims collapsed onto the concrete, mortally wounded. As his mother rushed to his side in the chaotic aftermath, the dying gunman gasped out his final, fatalistic justification. "Mama, they were going to kill me anyway." After the shooting, many people questioned how Sims had been allowed back on the streets so many times despite his long criminal record. He had been arrested repeatedly as a juvenile, convicted of armed robbery as an adult, and given multiple chances on probation before the violence finally caught up with him. If these cases prove anything, it's that running from prison rarely changes the outcome. Every person in this video believed they had one last way out, but that decision never gave them the freedom they were chasing. Instead, they left behind grieving families, injured officers, innocent victims, and consequences that can never be undone. If you enjoyed this series, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.